right. Got ourselves it's almost looking like a chocolate dinosaur. You can be a little messy where you get down, like I said, by the ground, and it's okay. All right. Whoop. Again, upside down, I found more spots that I missed. That's the way to go. All right. Another spot there by his other leg, back leg. Tail's looking good. Very tip of the tail is not bad. Now I'm going to start painting the back of his area back here, the hat, I guess, on the dinosaur. That's a technical term. Alright, so what I'm about to do is I'm about to no longer have a face handle on Bob, so I'm going to have to start making sure to grab him by the base, because I'm going to paint up this whole face area, which I've been usually using as a handle for a while, and push up my glasses, and hopefully get this stuff ready so that it will take him a bit of time to dry, and that'll be okay. All right. Potentially work on the horns while we wait for the main body to dry. Feel free to paint right up to the edge of the horns, even on the base of the horns a little bit if you need to be. Like I'm getting right up near there. And we're going to cover up any mistakes in the next step. So all we got a little bit is the beak area, and then we're going to be ready to go. Technically, he's got that third horn coming out of his nose, hence the term Triceratops. But I've covered it up. We'll go back and fix it in a little bit. If you don't cover it up, that's also cool. So we've got all of this. We've got the mouth. I'll make sure to get rid of all that primer. Alrighty. And catch along. There's a lot of little ridges on the top of his dinosaur hat thing here, and so make sure you catch all of those, because that can be a place where it might look like right now it's just a shine from the paint drying, but actually it's a spot where I missed the primer altogether. So just go back and catch those ridges and kind of get your bristles in between those things. And then once you got Bob pretty much covered, definitely flip him upside down and look at him from another angle. Check to make sure everything looks good. And there you go. That's you're all done. That's not true. You're just done with the first step. Make sure to give your brush a good wash, because if, like me, you've been sliding that brush in between two different legs to paint the third leg way up towards the front, you're going to have a bunch of paint all over, and give it a good wash. Wipe it off good and nice on your paper towel. catch all that extra stuff. Look at the handle, make sure that there's not a bunch of wet paint on there, which you'll then potentially transfer onto your clothes or, you know, whatever. So I'm actually just gonna clean it like this here and then give it another one here. Normally when you're cleaning a brush, your best way to do it, you do not point it down onto the paper and scrub it back and forth, because that's the easiest way to ruin a brush. You can just get it good and wet and just draw it along the paper. And then the capillary action, that's maybe not the right word for it, but it's the word I'm going to use. Then that's what pulls the paint hopefully out. When you start on the paper doing this and you don't see any paint coming out, then you know you've got a pretty clean brush. How's everybody doing with Bob? Mostly covered? It's good to hear. It does make him a little difficult to pick up now that I've set him down. I'm not gonna lie, there we go. See, and I just found a toe that I missed. I said this in the previous 2 classes. One of the best ways to find spots that you missed is to completely finish the model and then start taking pictures of it, because then you'll be like, how did I miss that toe? And it just seems to come up. I don't know if it's just psychological where you completely miss it, but then the photography captures it and it's a different way to see it, translating it from 3D to 2D. I'm not sure. All right. I think we're good. Thanks. Now you'll see there, I do not have a clean brush after I brought it out of the water, because I've got some of that, so I just kind of go back and forth a little bit more, give it a good shake. There we go. Now I got a clean brush. All right. So let's see here. While we're waiting for Bob to dry out, we could actually, you know, we could do some wet blending. What do you think about that?
Or do we want to do some dry brushing?
Well, we want to do some dry brushing as well, but we might want to do some wet blending as well.
Let's do both.
I think we should do both. I agree. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little bit of this carne, okay, well, tan is the color. It turns out that I can't speak Spanish. So does everybody got some tan, I think? 72.066. All right. So we're just going to take a glob of the tan while Bob is still drying out a little bit. And we're not going to take a lot. And we're getting it wet. And then we're just going to actually start on Bob's back a little bit. While everything's still a little wet, we're just going to take it and we're just going to kind of go down the ridge here, and we're just going to make this stripe, which is going to look terrible, but stay with me here. We're going to get a little bit of our paint off, and now we're just going to kind of start blending it a little bit together right along this ridge. And as it kind of moves away from the ridge, you're kind of blending it away. And this is what they call wet blending. It's you got wet paint and you put another color of wet paint on it, and you sort of wiggle the two of them together. The reason we're doing it on the top is this is kind of where the sun would sort of hit maybe, but you know, he's a big lizard. It could be just different variations in the way that his skin is built. But you're just basically putting wet paint on wet paint and then working it around. You're just sort of, like I'm just going back and forth to keep this ridge, but then I start working it away from the ridge. And when you're using paint, you're pulling the paint. So if you start here and pull this way, it's pulling the pigment with it. And since we're doing this, it's just sort of making a, like initially, like I said, it kind of looked like a mess. It looked like I just painted these weird stripes on them. But now I've kind of moved it around and it's going to do this. Now it's going to be subtle. When it gets done and dry, you're going to barely notice it, but it will be there. It won't just be one color. It'll be a little bit of variation of the two. So definitely feel free to kind of get in there. If you want to throw in a little bit more, you want to go back here and throw in a bit more of a stripe here and a little bit more of a stripe here, and then just work it back and forth, wiggle it back and forth. You are now wet blending. That's a at the very least, an intermediate kind of technique. A lot of people are afraid of wet blending, but especially with big open areas like this, it's a good idea to just sort of get in there and just kind of move some pigment around and see what you get. And if you don't like it, we can go back and fix it because we haven't done anything else yet to the base color. So if you want to kind of darken it back up again, just go back to the original brown we used and kind of go back over there and work it in. And you can always say and look at it and go, oh geez, maybe I put too much on. Well, you just clean up your brush a bit and then just work it back and forth with a little bit of water in there and blend it down. And now it almost looks as if I don't want to say airbrushed it, but it kind of looks like it's blending from one color to another, which is what the whole point of wet blending is. It's really hard sometimes to do as a beginner on a small little model, but on a big old dinosaur like Bob, it's not hard at all. Oops, see, now that was too much. I'm going to fix that. Your finger's also an eraser, in case you didn't know. Although, then I did take off a little bit of the brown, which I didn't want to do, so we'll just do that. All right, so now Bob's got a nice variation going from a kind of a tan to brown. So he's got a little bit of a, he's bleached out by the sun. It's not, Bob does not use SPF anything, so that's kind of the problem, but See, there you go. You have more than mine, but that's nice. There you go. So yeah, so now we've got some variation there in the back, and it's a little bit of a fade, so we do a little bit of wet blending. Sometimes you do wet blending because you don't want to wait for stuff to dry, and that's basically what we did here. The other bonus is that now it offsets his back from his face, because his face is a lot darker. We didn't do any wet blending there. We could, but I think we're just going to stick on the back and kind of learn this. So you can always just, when paint's wet, it's the best time to blend it. Alrighty. Excellent. All right. Always feel free to blow on your model to help dry it a little faster. If you've got an old hair dryer, if you've been to a rummage sale, yard sale, whatever they call it in your neck of the woods, you get yourself a cheap $2 hair dryer. It helps to speed things up as you're painting. You don't want to turn it on too hot, especially with like models like this, because you might make, Bob's horns all droopy or whatever, because it'll kind of melt it a little bit. We don't want that. But getting a lot of air to go over the top of your model helps to draw it out or dry it out a lot quicker and lets you get painting to the next step. Another thing is, generally, in most situations, I would not just paint one model at a time. I would generally have, let's say, several different dinosaurs, and I could be working on Bob and get this kind of blend going on in his back and all that kind of stuff, and then pick up another dinosaur and start working on that while I'm waiting for Bob to dry. And working, even though they're very different, I'm going to use different colors and all that kind of stuff, I'm still working in a bit of an assembly line, so I can kind of give the paint time to do its thing, and that's fine. So what are we going to do for the horns on this guy? Let's see. Has everybody got some of this heavy ochre? 72.150. I think we're going to start using that on the horns. All right. So make sure to shake it up. Because I'm lazy, I have a machine at home to shake up my paints. It's fun. All right. Now, there's probably a pretty good chance that we've still got some wet of the original brown right up near the base of where the horns are going to get started painting, but we're going to use that to our advantage. There's no problems, there's only opportunities. Take that one home with you. All right, so we're going to start taking this stuff. I've got too much on my brush. And we're just going to start working on the horns. Now they're going to look real bright and yellow right now, but we're going to fix that later. But this is the good base color to start with. So I'm going to do the majority of the horns and not get too close to the actual brown of the body yet. That'll be kind of last step. Because what we're going to do is when the time comes, we're actually going to we're going to almost kind of wet blend between the brown and this horn color, and then it'll look a little bit less jarring to just go straight from, you know, horn color to body. I know, the disembodied voice is scary.
In half an hour, you can trade your pens at the Pin Bazaar at the Telefoyer from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's a great opportunity to get yourself some rare and interesting pens. Also, don't forget the Red Cross is still doing a blood drive in A114, and we still need heroes to donate.
All right.
Take time out of your day to do that as well. Thank you.
Just getting in here, being kind of careful. Bob is a little hard to hold on to right now because we're just holding on to the base, but a lot of times if you're at home and you're painting, a lot of times you can take a model like this and you can use some poster putty or something like that and stick it to some sort of handle, whether it's a cork or a paint pot, or I've seen people stick it to wood. I got a friend who uses wooden, you know, not like really big dowels. I think they're like maybe an inch or inch and a half. And then he uses that. He's got a nice handle, and then he can hold on to his models and get at them from all kinds of different angles, and it works out nice.
Empty pill bottle.
Empty pill bottles, also a good, yes, that's a good plan as well. I think technically I made a video about that. All right. So you'll notice there we've got the horns, and then we've got kind of a gray spot there in between that and Bob's brown skin area. Whoops, I got a little bit of that on his face. I'm going to fix that up real quick here. Just grab some of the other paint, just sort of blend it away. There you go, Bob. All right, so we got our horns. We're all set. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the same, whatever this is, tan ochre here, whatever, just tan. We're going to take this color, going to get a little bit on our brush, and we're just going to go right up against, where that brown paint is. Just keep going and keep going. And then once we kind of touch it, then we're going to sort of wiggle it and then bring it back towards us, right? So we're grabbing a little bit of the brown actually from his body and wiggling it, bringing it back into the horn. And what we're going to do is be blending in a little bit of just wiggling and scrubbing it back and forth. It's going to be subtle, but you're going to kind of see like that color sort of come forward. We're going to be throwing wash over this in the future, and it won't be a big deal, but just, we don't want it to look like it's a super sharp line. So right there, if I can not hit the camera, just going to put it on there. You can see it's like I got a little bit of a thing. I'm just going to wiggle it, bring it forward, and that's how we're blending it. Makes it look a little bit more natural as a horn comes out of a, well, I haven't seen any Triceratops live in real life, but like a cow or whatever, you do have, it's usually darker towards the base because, you know, that's where the cow is, and cows are, you know, they don't take showers a lot and stuff like that, and I don't think Bob does either, so that's how you get this sort of kind of stuff. And if it's like this side dried a little bit on me over here, honestly, so I'm just actually going to add a little bit of it in there and just sort of move it around. And again, we're wet blending. Now we're doing it on a horn. That's pretty cool. And it's giving us some texture. If we make these models so that they are just solid colors, well, that doesn't look kind of realistic. But when you make things kind of modeled and beat up a little bit and naturalistic, it makes it look a little bit nicer. So there we go. Obviously, again, turn Bob upside down, catch him from underneath a little bit, find spots there. Along that part there, underneath. Now, and this is up to you. You can do it or not. At this point, I'm going to go back to my base, kind of that real like yellowy tan color, and I'm going to go along the top of the horns just a little bit. I'm going to edge it. I'm going to use the side of my brush. You guys can't see that. Side of the brush instead of the tip. And I'm just going to catch it along the top and just run a line of the light color across the top. And that is us showing the light of the sky coming down and hitting the model from above. It's called a highlight for obvious reasons. And if your stripe is real sharp, then feel free to just kind of wiggle it out. But we do want the horns to be, if possible, a little brighter on the top than they are on the bottom. And because there's only the 2 horns here, really, it's a pretty quick little process. Wait, Bob is a Triceratops. There are 3 horns. So we should make also sure to do this one over here. To be fair, he's got 5 horns, so he should be a... I don't know what that would be. A pentoceros? Well, you know. Bob can do what Bob wants to do. That's fine with me. So, just going to catch the nose one. I think that's a technical term. There we go. Now, if someone tells you, hey, you know, I don't think that's what color Triceratopses are supposed to be, well, if they've seen one and got a good picture on their phone that they can show us, that's great. But since they don't, we can make them whatever color we want. Catch a little bit of the underside of Bob's nose horn. There we go. Found another spot that I missed with the original brown. So I'm cleaning off all of that, and I'm grabbing some of the brown that I still have left on my palette, and I'm getting them right there. And there's chin. What do you got going on? There you go. Yeah. See that's.
I did it up more and I did it
Yeah, you got a little bit darker. Yeah. And did you catch his nose one?
I'm doing that.
Doing that next? All right. Good. All right. Now. What I'm thinking about doing next is this. So we've got our 3 colors here. We've got our dark brown that we started with. That's covering most of Bob. We've got this tan color that we use to sort of like do a little bit of wet blending across the back. And you'll notice now, if yours is probably dried a bit, you probably don't see as much of the wet blending as you did when you first started. That is because paints, as they dry, the term is that they dry down. That means they get darker as they dry. So when we saw a very kind of bright contrast between our, whatever color that is, the tan maybe? I don't know. What color is that? Yeah, the tan. So the tan there, when we started using that for our wet blending, it was a little bit more stark, a little bit more contrast, and now it's dried down, which is cool. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit more wet blending, although he's kind of dried a bit at this point. So we may be in a situation where we don't want to do wet blending yet, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to grab a little bit of this color again that we used on the horns. I'm going to make it wet, and I'm going to just brush it across. Again, trying not to go on. I want to keep this weird spine thing on his back. That's going to be a contrast, and it's going to be some color. So I'm just going to, again, do a little bit of wet blending, wiggling it back and forth. This is at this point becoming almost like dry brushing, but it's more what they call overbrushing. Some people call it wet brushing, which is also descriptive. And that's just going to give me even a little bit more. If you don't want to do this, that's cool. It's just going to be a very quick step where we're just going to do this to kind of give him a little bit more variation to his skin tone. So, you know, that looks like it's way too much, right? But I'm going to blend it, and it's going to go away. Also, just add a touch of water if you want to help yourself blend. And then just sort of wiggle it back and forth. And again, it will dry down, and then you won't look like it's quite as contrasty. In any spots where you're like, this may be too much, you can mop it up with a little bit of water, spread it around, and it'll be fine. There we go. So now Bob has got a nice kind of variation going on there. I thought about putting stripes on Bob maybe even, but that's a lot of work at this point, so we're going to wait on that. I want Bob's horns to dry faster, but Bob is not helping me out here. All right. So while we're waiting for Bob's horns to dry, we're going to use, I'm thinking the Umber Wash. 73.203. You got to shake this good. Now this is very different from the paints that we've already used on our palette. The paints on our palette are pretty thick. Viscous maybe is a word. That sounds scientific. This is a lot thinner. So when you put it on your palette, you usually want to keep it away from your paints a little bit, and also understand that these tables have not all been leveled by, one of those levels, whatever. So make sure that it doesn't run. If it's on your plate and you need to stick something underneath it to keep it so that it doesn't run around, do that. I'm gonna pick them up. So we're gonna get some of this, the Umber Wash, and this you don't need to wet your brush for. You can if you want to, but you don't need to. You wanna make sure your brush is clean. I'm gonna do that real quick. Yep, get a clean brush. Umber Wash we're using. It's right here. There you go. And what we're gonna do is we're going to do some washing on Bob, but not up in the top areas here where we did the wet blending and all that. We're going to start taking some of this Umber Wash, and we're going to find some of the folds on Bob here that are like little crevices that shadows and things might get into. So kind of where his legs, he's got the folds there kind of by his legs. We're going to get some in here, and we're just going to load up our brush pretty heavy and just kind of get it in there, and we're going to add a bunch of shadow definition when we do that. He's got a big fold back here by his tail. We're just going to kind of get it in there to help darken that fold and just move it along the stroke along with the shape of the tail. It's got a fold back here. Just kind of bring it along there. You can get it, let's see here. Basically, we're adding in a shadow. Normally, nature would add in a shadow, but when a model is very small, like if we made a sculpture of Bob that was full size, you wouldn't need to go in and paint highlights and shadows because just the normal lights in the room would do so. But when models are small like this, you want to add in some highlights and some shadow because as things get smaller, we don't perceive those things as easily. So we sort of have to force it. It's kind of like in, if you've ever been to the theater, and I don't mean a movie, but I mean like going to a play. If you ever talk to any of the people who were in the play, after the play, before they've taken off their makeup, the makeup is very scary, but that's because it has to play to the people at the back of the thing. So it's not meant to be seen close up, and it's kind of what we're doing here. We're adding in a little bit more. We're accentuating the highlights and the shadows and things like that. Right now, it's the shadows. So we're just going to catch this fold back here on the tail, and again, we're just getting stuff on our brush, trying not to get it on his leg, and just drawing it across there, and that's how we're building up the shadows in these folds. You can feel free to get a little crazy with it in the under areas here because we're again building shadows underneath of this leg. Up by his face here, he's got these kind of parts, I don't know if it's jowls, but we kind of put that in there. The other thing that a wash will do is because it sinks into the recesses and the detail spots on the model, it makes those details pop out more. So if you just take a normal model and paint it a single color and then start doing some wash, you can really make it look like you've gone in and painted in all these extra details when actually you just loaded up your brush and sort of wiggled it around in the right spots. Painting miniatures is very, very, very much about learning technique. Another thing you can do with wash is that when you're applying it, you want to push the brush and the bristles to where you want the majority of the color to end up. If I just started here on his back and I just started pushing this way, as I move along this way, I'm pulling the pigment along with the bristles in the brush, and then where I stop and lift it is where the majority of that pigment ends up. So if I want the majority of the pigment to be here, I wouldn't start here and then swipe this way. I would start over here and swipe this way. And then when I lift, that's where you deposit the pigment, just like here on this plate. So if I get some on there and I start swiping this way and then stop, you'll see that as you're pulling it this way, it becomes more dark down in here and you're pulling it that way. Ouch. All right, so we've got a little bit of subtle variation in Bob up here now. He's got a nice kind of lighter color going on in here, and we're getting some dark stuff in the crevices and go in that direction. Going to get some on the folds of his paws. No, not really. Legs, I guess. Get a little bit between his toes. Bring out that detail. And then we should be pretty done with this portion. And I just found another spot that I missed. How am I doing this? There you go, Bob. All right. Got a lot of shadow in there. Slopped in there. Underneath by the chest a bit. Just building up our shadow that way. All right, our horns should be dry at this point, or pretty close to it. Close enough. So now we've got another wash, and this is Sepia Shade 73.200. We're going to shake this up good. And again, this is a wash / shade like the other one. So we probably want to keep it away from our paints because it's pretty fluid and it'll run. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some sepia and we're going to start working on the horns a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to start from about, let's say, halfway down the horns and pull towards where we hit the skin. So put a stroke in there and pull towards where we hit the skin. And then just a little bit of water. And then just keep stroking it back because we're going to be trying to push as much of this stuff into this area here where the horn meets the skin. But we don't want to leave a bunch of it. We don't want any up at the tip, and we don't want any kind of really to sit tight in the middle. We're trying to make almost like a gradient, like a fade from the middle part to where the horn goes into the skin. So if you can see this here, I'm just going to start, move it along, push it into the spots so that it ends up here, and then a little bit of the wet brush, and then just sort of wiggle it back to help make this gradient happen, and don't touch back here. So and then we'll catch a little bit back here. And we're just pushing it to where we want it to go and why we want it to end up. It's kind of what you do with washes, is you push them to where you want them to end up. And if you see a spot where it's like clumped up or pooled a little bit, then just get in with your brush and just kind of scooch it around. I think that's a technical term, scooching. Because these horns should be, again, not particularly clean, and if you get some extra wash and you get it on his face, that's okay, because we're going to fix that later on. We're going to do a bit of dry brushing to make his face sort of stand out a little bit more. We're just kind of moving things along. All right. There we go. You dropped your dinosaur, man. All right, so now at this point, oh yeah, nice, yeah. So at this point on Bob's body, there's still going to be some wet washes in the folds and areas where we put it, which is okay because what we're planning on doing now is doing some dry brushing up on the top. So, what color should we use for the dry brushing? I honestly think we're probably just going to use the heavy ochre, which is our kind of yellowy color there. So, We clean off the big brush we've been using, and we set it a little ways away, and we go and grab our dry brush. Again, our dry brush is the one that's looks like it's been squeezed there at the metal of the ferrule, is what this part's called, and it comes in a flat top. If you want to put it in the water, you can, just to make sure like maybe the last person didn't clean it very much, but you want this brush to be relatively dry, hence the term dry brushing. All right, so what we're going to do, how many people here have dry brushed before? Majority, cool, but some people haven't, so we'll run through it real quick here. I'm going to move Bob a touch, move this a little bit. Cool. All right, so we're going to just dab it in the tip in our kind of more the yellowy color, which is called heavy ochre. And then you've got some on the brush, and then you just take it to your paper towel. You don't take it to Bob yet, and you just brush it back and forth. You make circles, make X's, whatever you want to do. And you want to get the majority of the paint off of your brush. And then what we're going to do, again, we're going to stay away from this kind of weird bumpy spine area, but we're going to brush back and forth this way. And we're just going to do it very quickly, and it's going to hit the raised edges and sort of give us a little bit more detail in just mainly on the raised bumpy parts. You can feel free to go back and forth on that. But again, I'm staying away from this ridge. You can kind of, the harder you press, the more likely it is to transfer a bit of paint. The lighter you do it, and the faster sometimes it's a little bit more subtle. I'm going to do the other side a little bit. Alrighty. And again, this is kind of to give a highlight to the raised areas and things like that, except for this spine, which we're kind of trying to stay away from, to give it a little bit of just a visual interest. The contrast gives it a bit of a visual interest. So feel free just to keep going back and forth. We don't want to go down too far, but you can go a little bit to the side tummy. I think I know my dinosaur anatomy. This is the side tummy. But the problem is we want to stay a little bit away from the wet areas if they've still got some wash that's not completely dry yet, so be careful of that, but otherwise we're good. I'm going to dry mine off a bit and then work on the other side. And again, it's a very simple process. We're just going to get a little bit of paint dabbed onto the tip, and we're just going to wiggle it back and forth, try to get the majority of the paint off, and then head right back over here. And just kind of back and forth dry brushing this way. And catch the top of this back leg here. The trick about highlighting is what you would normally do is you'd look at the model from above as if you were the sun or whatever. Maybe Bob's at the mall, so you'd be the lighting in the mall. But you'd be looking from above to see like where this highlight should hit. So there shouldn't be any highlight under here by his stomach, obviously, because there shouldn't be any light there. But when you look at him from above, you can see that having a highlight along the top of this leg, top of this front leg, this back leg sticks out a bit more, obviously along the tail, but we're going to actually do a little bit of blending on that as far as letting that color go to dark, which is fine. Here, it's going to be we've got a bit more shadow area back behind his Triceratops hat, and then, we've got that going on. So whenever you're trying to figure out where to put the highlights, just look at the model from above as if you were the lighting, and then you'll see the parts you should be touching with highlight. All right, Bob's face is still a little wet on mine, so I'm going to touch up the tops of his, his flanks back here. I'm not quite sure what part of the Triceratops this is. And again, you can go, I would generally go one direction or back and forth. I wouldn't scrub, in this situation, all kinds of different directions. I'd kind of pick one and go with it. And I'm going more of a vertical here because I'm trying to catch these folds here and the top of his back legs like that. And I will do the same on the other side. Also, a tip is when you're brushing off the paint for your dry brushing, you want to try to find a dry spot of paper towel. If you use the wet spots paper towel, it kind of doesn't help. So it's best to try to find the dry spot. When I'm painting at home, I usually have one paper towel for dry brushing and one paper towel for cleaning my brush. All right, so because Bob is very bumpy, this kind of dry brushing gives you a lot of great sort of texture. We can get that great look. And it looks like someone went through, like to people who don't paint miniatures a lot of times, when they look at this model, it looks to them like you went through and painted every single one of these bumps with a tiny, tiny little brush, but you were basically just lazy and did this. And that's the point. You're looking for the ways to make things quicker. All right. Bob's back leg over here is sticking out a little bit, so there's not a lot of texture on it, but I'm going to still give it a try and see if I can't do a little bit of dry brushing to give myself a bit of a highlight. The microphone's a little squirrely. There we go. So just going to catch that, and then I'm going to try to catch here to give myself a bit of highlight. There's a bit of texture there, so we can do that. That's not too bad. It's interesting sometimes as well, you'll start to see texture that you didn't know was there. Like there's this little fold right there that just appeared as I started dry brushing up and down. I didn't see it before. But the dry brush brings out that texture, so that's kind of nice. All right. And again, dry brush, when you're doing dry brushing, it will also dry down. So you might do it and it looks like it's maybe a little more for lack of a better term, contrasty than you thought it was going to be, but in actuality, as it dries down, it becomes a little bit more subtle and blends in a little bit more together, which is really actually kind of nice. All right, so again, we're not doing any dry brushing in the tummy or the underside of the tail because there wouldn't be any light hitting there from above anyway, and so we're helping to kind of fake ourselves a little bit of texture. How's everybody's face? And I mean, you know, the dinosaur face, not your personal face. Mine is still a little wet with a bit of wash, but we'll be working on that next. Nice, yeah, see? Now, while we're kind of waiting for the face to dry, I'm going to clean off my dry brush and do a bunch of that. I've got a pretty clean brush, and then I'm actually going to just take a sip of drink, and then we're going to actually do something fun with the really small brush. All right. So, we're grabbing the really small brush from our 3 brushes. We're getting it wet. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start by working on the bumps, some of the bigger bumps on Bob's back. And we're going to just add a little bit more pop, a little bit more standout to some of these bumps. So I'm going to take the little brush, get water in there, and I'm going to get myself a nice thin paint, not too much. Now, when you got a big clump of paint on the top of your brush, that's too much. So you want to then kind of, if you can find a wet spot on the napkin here, on your paper towel, you can kind of draw it like this, which will bring your paint brush to a tip a little bit more. Because you don't want too much, you don't want a glob on the end because that becomes difficult to control. So what we're going to do is do some of these bumps, like right here on his back leg, you can kind of see he's got these bumps. What we're going to do is not paint the entire bump. Let's say that my cell phone here was a bump on the back of his leg. We're going to try to paint just the top part, but not the underside of the bump, because the underside of the bump is going to become a shadow. So we just paint the top part of the bump, and I will try to show you on this cam what I mean. We're just going to try to get the top part, like up here, but not the underside, because the underside, when I do this, it makes my voice go weird. But
We're just trying to get it like that.
And I hope, yeah.
If I can get it in the camera, that'd be even better. There we go.
And feel free to just kind of do a little bit of a stroke, but you don't have to do the entire bump. Doing just the top part of the bump makes it look even more three-dimensional than it already is, and that'll just make it stand out a little bit more. I'm just using the same yellowy, the heavy ochre. You could use the tan if you wanted to as well, or we could even variate a little bit. That might not be a bad idea. Now, like I said, on this rear left leg he's got a bunch of nice bumps, so we'll just catch some of those. But on some of the other spots, like his front legs here, he doesn't seem to have any. He does have some on the back leg here as well. So we can do these as well if we want to. And we don't even need to do every single one of them as well. Some of the bigger ones I might do, but I'm not going to do all of them. All right. If you want to, yeah, we can do that too. Now, we've also got a bunch of these spots that run along both sides of that spine that we've been trying not to keep, or we've been trying to keep the original brown color. And we can go through and do some stuff there. Now, it's up to you. We could alternate if you want. It's up to you. I'm going to probably use more the middle color that we were using, which is called the tan, and those spots. Or, if you wanted to, you could do every other one. It's totally what you want to do. But I'm just going to grab some of this tan, get it on my brush, get a little bit of water in there, because while it's been sitting there on the palette, we haven't been using it as much. It might dry out a bit. And then we're just going to catch a bunch of these spots. And anytime if you get too much on there and you go, well, gosh, that's ruined it. Yeah, you didn't ruin it. You can just get a little water in there, wiggle it around a little bit, blend it, and now you meant to do that. On some of them, if you do a little bit more paint than others, that's fine. Again, this is an organic creature, so they're not always going to be the same color in every situation. Lord knows I've got weird spots on my body. You know, like a zit on my neck right now and that kind of stuff, so it's all over the place. You don't know. So now we've got some nice variation going on there, some sort of odd bumpiness. Find another spot right here, and a little bit of that. Where are we at on time? Sweet. All right. All right. Now we're going to have a little bit of fun, I think, with mixing some paint. Let's see, what should we do? How about... So, let's take our tan that we've used before, but we're going to make a new little spot on the palette. We're not going to use the big spot that we've been using over here, let's say. We're going to, because we're going to be mixing it, we want to maybe just put a little blob of the tan, 72066, and we're just going to put it like there. And then we're going to grab, I think everybody's got this, it's called Dead Flesh. Everybody got Dead Flesh? 72035. And we're going to put a glob that's basically the same size as the first one right next to it. Or as close as possible, certainly. That's pretty close. So you can see right there, I got 2 spots right there. And then we're going back to our friend the big brush. We're getting our friend the big brush wet. And then we're going to blend these 2 colors together. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of grabbing a little bit of each, and I'm just kind of mixing them together. If you got too much water, that's fine. You can kind of go back and fix it. So what we want is a different color than the one that we've already got. Oops. And honestly, give me that dead flesh again, Lee. I'm probably going to actually add a little bit more because I want it to go a little bit more towards this color and a little bit less towards the tan. I've got a giant bubble there. That was weird. There we go. All right. So there we go. There we go. Yeah, that's good. And make sure to just go kind of crazy with it. But then, and this is what's going to sound weird, is that once we get this nice and mixed, then we're going to take and clean most of it off of our brush, pretty much, because we've got too much paint on the brush. We don't want to start painting with a brush that's completely clogged with paint, but we need something to mix, so that's what we do. Some painters will have a separate brush they use just for mixing, and then the brush that they actually use for painting. I am generally not that fancy. So, got that all off. Now I've got this nice chunk of color here. And what we're going to do is we're going to work on the spikes on Bob's hat. So we're going to get some paint in there. And we're going to try to hold Bob gingerly upside down and just start working on these spikes. You want to be careful to try to not get too much on the normal skin areas. And you may end up painting just one side of them, and then we'll do the other side a little bit. However works best for you. You might be able to get it all in one fell swoop. That's cool too. But we're just trying to add a little bit of interest and contrast and make it so Bob's not just all one color and it kind of stands out a little bit. Bob needs to be able to impress a mate, so he's got these spikes on his hat. Again, if we have any paleontologists in the audience, they can let me know what this part's actually called. Or if someone wants to look it up on their phone. Now the trick about these spikes is we're going to have to do both sides. So I'm currently doing the front-facing portions, you can see there, but then we're going to have to do the backs as well. So it's best to do one side and then do the other. And again, I'm mainly using the side of the brush and I'm just swiping along like this. And you run out of a bit of paint, then you head back over here and you clunk the camera with your brush. There we go. Cool. And now we need to do the back side. This one's going to be a little bit harder. And I found more spots that I didn't catch in the very first step. So while the rest of you are working on the hat spikes, I'm going to fix the spot that I missed in the very first step, and I'll catch up to you. Bob, you should have said something. There you go. All right. Also, sometimes you gotta take off your glasses, at least if you're me. Nice. So we're working on this kind of small piece of detail right now. It is important when you're doing this, if you're concerned about your hands shaking, I bring my elbows in tight, and then I'm holding this pinky is super important. If I lost this pinky, I wouldn't be able to paint anymore, because this pinky is kind of the bridge that keeps it so that my hands stay together. So if I'm trying to do this without a support like this, it becomes very difficult. I think we might do his beak darker, actually. And again, if you don't catch every last bit of it, that's okay. However, I should try to get it on the camera so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. If you don't catch every last bit, it's again okay. That's just extra dirt that Bob didn't get off last time he jumped into the lagoon. And the backside is not as important as up at the top it's important to have that relatively okay looking, but as you get down into these weird spots near the rest of his body, if you don't catch it as much, it's okay. And again, you'll notice I'm using the pinky and I'm resting it here on this part of the hand so that these hands stay relatively together. And if they're going to shake, they should shake hopefully in the same direction, which will be pretty good. All right. All right, so hoping that at this point, most everybody's Bob's face is probably dry around the horns. So what we're going to do is trying to get the Gatorade out of our mustache, and then we're going to take this color that we just mixed for the spikes on the hat, which was the dead flesh color mixed with the heavy ochre. It's this color here. And we're going to use it to highlight the horns, and we're going to start. So before, when we were doing that wash, we started at the we started at the midpoint and worked back this way. Now we're going to start with this color, and we're going to try to do the same thing, but we're going to start at the midpoint and head towards the tip, because we want the majority of this color to be towards the tip. So start maybe not even halfway. I would almost start about a third. You only got a third of the horn here, so like here. And I'm just going to do this. And then if it looks like it is too sharp of a line from where I started painting to where I ended up at the end, the majority of the paint should be getting deposited at the end of the horn. But you can see I've got a bit of a sharp line there. Well, what we do is we just wet our brush, and then we just kind of worry it away. We just sort of wiggle it back and forth. And then mop up any excess with a dry brush. Well, not a dry brush, but you know what I'm saying. And just work it towards the tip. Any kind of extra of this lighter color, you just want to work towards the tip of the horn because you want it to kind of fade as you're moving that direction. But again, we're not going to be making it a perfect fade because it is a Triceratops horn, and he's, doesn't polish them necessarily. So some speckleness, some unevenness is just fine. But this kind of blending, kind of moving things together and lightening things up is what takes you from just putting a simple base color onto something and then going on to the next part and makes it just a little bit nicer. So you just get to that line where, the new paint started and the old paint was, and then you just sort of wiggle it back and forth and then just move it towards the tip, and you lift it there, and then that's where it deposits a good portion of it. And then you get a nice variation on that. All right. And again, look at it from every angle. Upside down, right side up. You're going to find the spots that are interesting and that you might have missed. All right. So we've got a nice kind of variation there where we're kind of going from where it comes out of his body and it gets lightened and bleached by the sun and whatnot as it moves out towards the tips. And if we wanted to be really cool, and if we had some red, we could put some blood on there like he just got in a fight, but I don't like to think Bob fights too much. All right. Now I got this weird spot on Bob's horn on mine where there's some of the wash kind of pooled a little bit, and so I'm going to try to fix that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this lighter color, get it in there, just cover up that spot a little bit, let it sit for a couple of seconds, and then just with a brush that's got a little bit of water in it, I'm just going to wiggle it back and forth a bit. And it'll be subtle. It won't completely erase it. It's not an eraser, but it does help to kind of, for lack of a better term, sort of smooth it out a little bit. And then if I want to go really bonkers, then I'm going to grab just a bunch of this same color we made earlier, and I'm going to start, now that the horn is actually wet, both horns are kind of wet, I'm going to be right up towards the tip, and I'm just going to put a bunch of it in there and then wiggle it a little bit. Deposit a bunch here, especially on the top, because again, you're looking at the horn coming down from above, and that's where the light source is. Anytime you've got a little bit too much contrast, if you want to get rid of it, you just wet your brush a bit, wiggle it, and that's kind of how you can blend it away. All right. I'm also going to work on Bob's nose a little bit, lighten that up along the top. Not a lot, but just enough. There we go. Let me see. So we got Bob's horns going. That's pretty cool. I think Bob's tiny, tiny little Triceratops eyes, those will be probably last. He's got a bunch of spots. He's got a nice variation going on there in his stuff. I honestly don't think we're going to paint his toenails. I don't think that they're going to be that much. Like if you look at an elephant, if you look at a drawing, like a cartoon drawing of an elephant, those little toes they've got are usually like a very different color than the rest of the cartoon elephant. But if you look at a real elephant, wow, that's a stripe, man. You got it. He's got a racing stripe. That one goes fast. But if you look at a normal elephant, a real life elephant, their whole bottom foot is all kind of one color. So we're going to kind of stick with that here too, I think. The contrast we're going to get down by the feet is when we do the base, and it's going to be a different color than everything else on the Triceratops, so it'll work out well that way. All right. So Bob's face is still a little wet on mine. Now what we can do is we can go back to this kind of dead flesh color here that we were using before to mix our middle color here. This is Dead Flesh 72 0.035, and it's a little bit of a greenish color. I'm not going to lie, but we'll fix that. I'm just going to take a little glob of it. Bit of a wet brush. That was too wet. And we're going to use this to highlight the head spikes that we just did. And even though it's kind of a bright green, it's going to work with the color that we've got here. You're not going to notice it that much. So what we're going to do, instead of repainting all these spikes we just did, we're just going to catch, again with the side of the brush, we're just going to catch just the tip, just nick it like this. And you only want to do it about halfway up the little head spikes. And it's just going to be a bright little highlight. On some of the bigger ones that are right here in the center, you can try to go from both directions, like that way and then that way. On the smaller ones, as we go along, you can just kind of push up against it and just pop it a little bit. We're not going to use this on the horns on his face down here. We're just going to be using it on these head spikes to sort of pop that color out a little bit more and to give it a bit more variation. Now on mine, Bob's back is dry, thankfully, so I can now hold him a little bit easier. I don't have to be so ginger with him. I did just paint my thumb green, so that's cool. We're using acrylic paints here. They are non-toxic, so don't worry about that. You can wash your hands afterwards. Nice, yep. I'm just grabbing the tip a little bit. And if you want to do the back, you can, but you don't have to. I think I probably will. And close up, these are going to look a little weird, I'm not going to lie, but from a distance, you're just not going to notice it, and it's going to just look like it's just got a little bit more variation, a little bit more highlight. But if you get really, really close, without crossing your eyes too much, you know, it'll look odd. But from a distance, you'll be like, oh yeah, those kind of pop out a little bit nicer. A lot of miniature painting is tricking the eye. All right. Cool. Bob's face is still a bit wet. I think he's nervous, and I think he's sweating. Now just for grins, I'm going to take some of this dead flesh color, this kind of greenish color that I had from before, and I'm actually going to take a little bit of it and maybe even do a couple of the spots on his back just randomly. You know, like this spot maybe here. And again, I'm just doing the top of the bump. I'm not doing the underside of the bump because then that automatically also adds in a little bit of a shadow. And again, I'm bracing my hands against my sides, against the table, and against each other so I can get in there, even with the bigger brush, because it comes to a decent tip, and I can just get in there and just do a little bit. And it's going to look a little bright maybe, but that'll be okay. It'll dry down. I think I'm not going to do the ones that run along the top of the spine on him, though. I'm just going to do some extra ones here and there. And if they don't dry down enough to our liking, we'll just go back and just throw a little dab of wash on top of it, which will soak into the recesses around the bump and give it a little bit more shadow, and also probably darken the bump a bit as well, and then we'll be fine. There we go. All right, our horns are looking pretty decent. Where is the dark wash? What do we got over here? Got the umber and the what? The sepia. We're going to want to use the umber. So you probably still have some umber wash on your palette from earlier, and if not, throw a little bit more on there. It's the darker of the two. The sepia wash is a little bit more reddish brown, whereas the umber is a bit darker. I do not mind dried, so I'm going to go a little bit of that. The umber wash is 73.203. And what we're going to do with this umber wash is we're going to make his mouth a little bit darker. So we're going to get some of that on our brush, and we're just going to kind of slop it around his mouth. He's not great with keeping himself clean. We know this about Bob. It's okay. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm just kind of drawing it around. Like, he's got this beak in the front, which we're going to be real subtle with, and we're just going to get it around his mouth here, like it's just darkening it down. Nope, the umber. This one. So we get it on his kind of beak nose, well, not the nose, but this part, and we get it around his mouth. Just get it in there, get it inside the mouth, because, you know, it would be dark inside of his mouth. We're just going to darken it down. It's going to be, again, pretty subtle when it's dry, but it will help to keep his mouth look dark and all that stuff. All right. Yep, also on the inside of the mouth. And then just for grins, I'm going to throw a little bit of that same color into like some of the folds again, back on by the tail. I'm going to clunk the camera a little bit. Catch it there. There's a bit of a fold that we found after doing a little bit of dry brushing along this back left side. Yes, left side. So I'm going to try to get a lot of it off my brush, and I'm just going to draw a line and just get a little bit of shade in there. This is the type of thing you do when you're waiting for other stuff to dry. So you just go back and go, all right, I'll just touch up a little bit of this and throw in a little bit of that and make things a little bit darker in certain spots. Catch the tummy again. There we go.
Attention exhibitors, just a reminder that Pink Origins vouchers can be exchanged for cash at exhibit registration from 9 to 10 a.m. every day, and we appreciate you taking those, as that is how we pay our volunteers. Thank you.
All right. Now you'll see here there's this shadow area that we've got in between these folds on Bob's right side, and the dry brushing really brought out the raised parts, and we did throw some wash in before, but I still want to get in there and just throw a little bit more shade in there. Really accentuate the dark parts of the model and to give you that lighting that you're building in kind of automatically. All right. I don't know what I did to Bob's face, but it is still a bit wet. All right. So we're getting towards, got about another half hour left. I think what we're going to do is we're going to work on the base, and then we'll probably go back and try to work a little bit on Bob's kind of faceplate hat area a little bit and try to see what we can do to kind of mimic this a little bit, but be a bit different than it is there. But I think we're going to start working on the base, and I think we're going to make it look like he's walking through the woods or the jungle or whatever.
We should put this as a dirt and then put that on.
Well, I think we put this in and we throw a bunch of brown wash on top of it. Ah, see, and it gets into all the crevices. All right, so we're going to start with dark green, 72.08, or sorry, 0268, whatever, yeah. I can do numbers. It's that one, dark green. And we're going to throw it on our palette. And if you remember the very first step where we had to cover up Bob, we're going to do the same type of thing here. But we are also going to do a little bit more wet blending. So we're going to lay down this on the entire base area, trying not to get it on his feet too much. So when we get right to his feet, just kind of push up against it.
Origins Film Festival in room B144 at 4 p.m. And don't forget, be the hero in someone's life and donate blood in room A114.
So start in the areas on your base here where it's kind of away from the feet, and get in there fast and loose and just cover things up. Now hopefully the back of your Triceratops is going to be dry, so you can use kind of his back as a handle, because pretty soon you won't be able to hold on to the base at all because the base is going to be wet. So, and as I say that, I transfer my hands so I can actually do that. Now you may say, well gosh, this is awfully bright green, but we're going to darken it up. Get it on the edges. It's a good place to miss. Now as you start getting close to a foot, let's say here, again, you're going to have some paint on your brush, and you're just going to push up against near the toes. Kind of shove in there, but not too close. Try not to go onto the toes. Be a little slower as you do that, but it'll work out. And again, you're going to probably have to go from some angles to get in there. You're going to have to hold them upside down. You're going to have to do some of that stuff like we did before. We were trying to paint all the underparts of Bob. And when you get close there to the foot, just push up against it. And again, go fast in the big areas and go slow when you get near the feet. All right. And then once we get this base all done, we're going to then do a little bit of wet blending. And when we do the wet blending, what we're going to do is we're actually going to do the majority of it below where Bob is standing. So we're not going to do it around the edges as much. We're going to basically add in some shadow as if it is the shadow that Bob is casting as the sun beats down on him from above. So we will be using our dark brown as our wet blend. But you want to get the green in there first, otherwise you got nothing to wet blend with. So if you try to wet blend in an area with no paint already in it, then that's just painting.
And again, upside down is probably the way to go in a lot of this situation.
Yeah, I think I need more paint. Can you hand me the green, please? You get the green? Psst. You get the green? Thank you. All right. Yep, sorry. So we're just poking it into all the little nooks and crannies of this base that he's kind of standing on, which we're going to believe is the ground of the forest. And we're going to make it a little bit less green in just a second. So the rest of you might be done. I think I'm almost done. I'm pretty close. Got to catch the back leg here. Try not to get too much on Bob. All right. So then we're going to take the dark ochre stuff, whatever it's called. No, not the wash. Not the sepia shade. Heavy sienna, whatever, that stuff. It's the same base color we used originally to start on Bob nearly 2 hours ago. We're going to put that on our plate. And I've still got green on my brush from finishing that base. I'm not even going to clean it off because we're going to wet blend. So I'm just going to get some green on there, or brown, sorry. And I'm going to start working it in, again, not on the edges, but more underneath Bob. And we're just going to work it and kind of blend these colors together. We start right in the center and then start kind of worrying it around and working it out towards the center, or out towards the edges from the center, sorry. And let these colors mix together right there on the base. That's wet blending. Make sure you can get it into the crevices and things like that. We'll just kind of do it that way, and then that way we don't have such a bright green anymore. We've got a little bit of a muted green, but it gets brighter as it moves out towards the edge of the base. Some people will even tell you if you're painting a normal model like a guy on a round base, that you want the lighter part of the base to be towards the front of the model and then blend to a darker color on the base as you head towards the back of the model, because it gives more visual interest to the front side of the model, which is what you should be looking at anyway. So yeah, we got that. So we instantly kind of added a little bit more mud and a little bit of extra goop and whatnot going on there. We're just wiggling it around, trying to get it in all the spots, blending these colors together. If you're going to wipe your brush off because it's starting to get gummy, do that, but then don't bring too much water back into this if you can. So yeah, I've got a clean brush now, and I'm just going to grab a little bit more of this brown, and I'm just going to kind of work it into these spots back here. I'm just wet blending these colors together. And if this dries in enough time, we might throw a wash on it, or you might do that when you get home, or you might even want to do some dry brushing. But this kind of wet blending is what kind of helps to get you used to doing it in other places, like on Bob, which we already did. But wet blending on bases, wet blending on terrain, things like that, it just helps you get over that trepidation, because there's a lot of people that don't like wet blending or they think they can't do it, but you can do it. It's not hard. All right. Now while we wait for that base to dry, we're going to hopefully have everyone's Bob's face dry. Mine still looks a little shiny, so maybe it's not even that it's wet. It might just be that it's... Sometimes washes will sometimes dry a little glossy. It depends. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go back to our dry brush. Make sure to clean off the brush you've been working on your bases with. get it good and wet. Wiggle it around in the bottom there. If you're getting nothing on your paper towel, then you got a clean brush. We're gonna go back to our friend the dry brush with the flat tip. And I think what we're gonna do is we are going to use, I think we want to be a little subtle with this. So what we're going to use is, again, the tan color, which is 72.066. You probably already have it still on your palette, but if you don't, or if it's dried out, throw it on a little bit. And what we want to do here on Bob is you'll notice that if you look real close on Bob here, I'm going to use the back of my brush. There is a raised ridge right down the center. There's a raised kind of ridge here and a raised ridge here. Being a Triceratops, I assume that there's some sort of significance to that. So he's got that going on. So we're going to try to very subtly to start with our dry brush. We're going to get some paint in there. We're going to try to find the dry spot on our paper and brush as much of it off as possible. And then we're going to try to work it just in those three raised areas, and we're going to go side to side instead of up and down. So we're just going to dry brush back and forth. And it might take a bunch of coats because we don't want it to be like 0 to 60 too quickly. We want to make it subtle and build it up. So you can see there I'm starting to kind of build this, and I do work a little bit side to side and not just, and a little bit up and down actually. That does speed things up a touch. But the side to side is what's going to help to blend it into the rest of the model. This is what makes a pretty sharp line. You start to see a pretty sharp line going this way, but the side to side is what brings it so that you can kind of blend it into. We're using the tan color there. And again, it might look brighter than you expect, but then it will dry down. So sort of showing off these sort of three bumps in this area, these three ridges along his head there. That's going to just be a little bit more visual interest and tie into the fact, in case anyone hasn't realized, that he is a Tyrannosaur, or whatever he is, Triceratops. And I'm also catching a little bit on the tops of where the bone, the horns come out. I'm just the tops to give it, again, a little bit of variation, a little bit of highlight. But I'm not going down like into this area or this area because I want to keep that part dark. All right. Got some sort of fun variation there. Now, while we're still waiting for the base to dry, we can also, as promised, work on Bob's eyes. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our tiny brush. Looks much like that. We're going to get it wet, and we're going to use that same kind of greenish dead flesh color that we used on the tips of his spiky bits. And we're going to give him bright green eyes, which we'll then throw a little bit of wash over once they're dry, and then it'll dull them down and it won't look so weird. Make sure you understand where his eyes are too. Like, get a good look before you turn it upside down, because once you turn it upside down, it's harder to kind of spot. So get the idea and go, oh yeah, okay, cool, that's where it is, okay. And again, holding your hands and everything together and locking your body all together. That makes you the most sturdy. And again, it's going to look a little bright and kind of silly at this point, but we'll darken it up in a sec. I think sepia. If you need a little bit more water, because the skinny little tiny brush will dry out faster than the big one. That's just part of not having a big belly. There we go. There we go. And that should dry pretty quickly on him, and then we can throw a little bit of wash. I'm going to blow on the base a little bit as well, try to see if I can get that a little bit further along. It's not too bad right now. All right, while we wait for the eyes to dry, I think we're going to throw a nice layer of wash on the base. And again, we're not going to wash the entire base. We're going to mainly just try to wash underneath Bob because we're going to add in more shadow there.
What wash do you think I used here?
What wash?
Yeah.
Might have been black. We don't have that right now.
So actually this one. That would be this one.
I don't remember exactly on that one. Where's the washes? Can you hand me the washes? Oh, there you go. So we're going to use the umber wash in this situation, which we should probably already have on our plate, but it might be dried up, so throw it on a couple of drops. Make sure it doesn't run away on you like mine's trying to. There we go. And then we switch back to our big brush again, which is over here.
What wash are we using?
Yep, umber wash. Yep. And then we're just going to start again, kind of like we did with the wet blending before, but we're going to be trying to basically even get rid of more of the, like, because we were doing the blending, there's probably going to be some of that green that's in the crevices. So the brighter green being in the crevices looks a little weird. So we're going to use this wash to even darken that up a little bit more. So I'm going to pretty much just be doing it underneath his body. I won't be doing it any wash out, towards the edges here where the green is. If you want to, that's cool, but this is what I'll be doing. I'm going to be getting out towards the edges and then stopping. I'm basically just trying to fill up crevices right now. You can also use the umber wash if you've got some spots where the feet and the green kind of meet and you need to just kind of touch that up. Wash is a great way to make two colors that are touching each other not look like they're uneven or anything along those lines. You kind of get it like right along those edges and it'll clean it right up. His tail goes out way over the base, so I'm going to just add a little bit more wash back here. Just going to add in a little bit more of the shadow. Just found a spot where I didn't paint any green at all. I'm going to fix that. Okay. So that's cool. Washes take a bit longer to dry, so that's kind of a good idea to sort of do this a little bit more last step since we're just about done with the class. And that's pretty much that for the wash on the base. And then the last probably thing that we may do, I think, and this is up to you whether you want to do it or not, I'm going to take that umber wash, the sienna wash, sepia wash. Where's the sepia wash? There it is. 73.200, and I'm going to take just a little bit of that sepia wash, and I'm going to dab it right on Bob's eyes to sort of darken them a little bit. If you want to keep the eyes kind of bright to kind of draw a little more contrast, feel free to do so, but I'm just going to get a little bit of the wash, and I'm going to actually put it kind of all the way around, like that. I'm going to catch the bottom and the top, and then it will automatically kind of flow over the middle, and it'll make his eyes a little bit less, he won't look like Batman as much, so that's cool. There we go, just a little bit. Helps him stand out. And throw a little bit of wash underneath his neck. Again, whenever you're waiting for something else to dry, it's always a good idea just to do some details and just add in some shadow and make sure you didn't miss any spots, which I still am missing some spots here and there. Along the edges here on this base. All right. I'm going to add a little bit of this sepia wash too, just to kind of cover this up a little bit. Make the edges a little bit more blended, a little more subtle. There we go. So now we can just spend the next 8 minutes blowing on our models and see who passes out first. There you go. And then I think we have a winner. If there's any spot that stands out to you a little bit more than you might like I've got some of these the dead flesh kind of spots back there on the back. If you want to just take a little bit of the sepia wash, and just kind of dab it, you can do that, and it will drop it down a little bit, but still keep it there. You don't have to, but anytime you see something that you're like, that's going to be too bright or too much or whatever, you can always just throw a little bit of wash on it, depending on which wash you use, sepia wash. Well, in this situation, between the sepia and the umber wash, I would take the sepia. If you see anything you want to maybe touch up a little bit more with dry brush, you can totally do that. Like, I've kept the tail pretty au naturel, if you know what I mean. But I could do a little bit of dry brush just for fun and just catch these edges. I want to be real careful to not get too much in there, but just sort of just causes them to pop a little bit more. And if you get a little bit too much streakiness, then you just sort of do a little bit of this. But again, you don't have to. Also, thinking about the environment that he lives in, if there was maybe dust or dirt on his feet, you could do that a little bit. We did that with our stone giant yesterday. We threw a little bit of dust on his cloak, where his, because he's living in a cave. He's not going out for laundry too frequently, I don't think. So, got that. But yeah, so this guy's been working out pretty well, and it's just a little bit. Basically, it's 90% of it is painting, and then the last 10% is spending 90% more time on just finding little details and touch-ups and things you want to finish. and all of that kind of stuff. So it works out pretty well. So you can see I've added a little bit to the tail. I can also back it off a little bit. Dry brushing is a great way to make it look like you've added more detail to a model than you actually did. And it's easy to do. There's a boy. Oh, jeez, keep clunking the camera. I'm going to take a picture.
Thanks, dude.
A little bit of shade between the toes, just in case. And it's just touching up at this last point. I hope everybody's happy with their bob. I'm amazed I haven't drunk my paint water yet. Thanks. Because I've reached for it on several occasions.
Yesterday I did that.
You drank your paint water yesterday?
I
Oh, yeah.
was just painting.
It's a rookie mistake. No, you want to definitely have like a mug or something, and then you're good.
It wasn't in the same cup.
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, you'll get that.
It was clean cup. Straw. If I wasn't with it, I was just painting.
How close can we get Bob? Not that close. As far as he goes.
Since he lives in a
What's that?
since he lives in a all the time, he can have grass. Obviously, grass, rocks.
Yeah, no. All right, thanks everybody. I hope you had a good time, and if you've got any questions, let me know. I'll be up here. And thanks for coming to one of the WizKids painting classes here at Origins 2019.